Maya Chen had always been the bold one in the group. The one who ordered the strange thing on the menu. The one who spoke first at parties when the silence stretched too long and everyone was looking at the floor. The one who sent the email other people drafted and didn't send. The one who laughed the loudest in quiet restaurants and never apologized for it. Bold was her brand. Bold was her armor, though she would have resisted that framing on most days because she preferred to think of it simply as who she was. But tonight, sitting cross-legged on her best friend Dana's bedroom floor, surrounded by 3 other women and an almost empty bottle of red wine that had been very good 40 minutes ago and was now becoming less relevant to anyone's enjoyment of the evening, she felt something she rarely felt, nervous. Not the good nervous, not the edge of something exciting nervous. The other kind. The kind that came from knowing something mattered. Truth or dare? Maya, Dana pointed with theatrical menace, her dark lashes lowering over mischievous brown eyes that had known Maya for 15 years and could read her state with uncomfortable accuracy. Dana was a woman who weaponized care she found her soft places not to press on them but to tend them, which was worse in certain circumstances because you couldn't defend against it. Always dare. Maya lifted her chin. That was her brand. That was her armor. That was the answer she'd given 100. 10s in 100 games on 100 evenings. And it had never caused a problem because the dares were always about ordering something awful or calling an ex or doing 20 seconds of embarrassing dance. Okay, Dana grinned, exchanging a look with the other 2 women, Priya, who taught yoga and had the world's most expressive eyebrows and the very specific talent of communicating entire paragraphs with a single facial shift, and Sasha, who'd just gone through a messy divorce and was clearly in the phase of her processing or someone else's. Embarrassment was profoundly therapeutic. Call someone, anyone, we pick who. And you have to keep talking to them for at least 5 minutes, Maya shrugged. Easy, Dana pulled out her phone, scrolled with the deliberate performance of someone who'd already decided exactly where she was going to land. Then turned the screen around with the satisfied expression of someone who had just played their best card in a game they'd been setting up for considerably longer than anyone had realized. The name on the screen was Dr. Elise Hartwell. Maya's stomach dropped exactly the way it always did when she heard that name. Saw that face in the contact photo, precise features, those dark-framed glasses. The quality of someone who was always thinking about something, the way it dropped when she thought about those sharp green eyes. That careful, controlled voice that somehow always managed to crack something open inside her chest, just by saying ordinary things in its particular way. Absolutely not, Maya said, and the room erupted in the specific way of women who had been waiting for exactly this reaction. You said always dare. Priya shrieked, her eyebrows reaching nearly architectural heights. You can't take it back. Sasha raised her wine glass with the energy of someone who needed this win more than the wine. The rules are sacred, Dana said, with the solemnity of a judge pronouncing something inarguable. The rules have always been sacred. You know this. You helped write the rules. I wrote the rules and I didn't know they'd be used like this, Maya said. That's what rules are for, Dana said simply. She had the phone tilted in her hand, Elise's name still glowing on the screen. Waiting. Maya stared at the name. Dr. Elise Hartwell. Her colleague technically. They worked in adjacent fields, crossed paths at conferences and consultations, had a professional relationship that had long since acquired a texture that was not entirely professional. Her occasional lunch companion. The woman who had delivered a keynote speech at the city's architectural symposium last spring that Maya had watched from the 3rd row. She'd gotten there early. She didn't usually get to keynotes early. She told herself it was about the topic with her heart, doing something completely unprofessional. The entire time, the woman Maya had been very carefully not falling in love with for approximately 2 years and 3 months. She grabbed the phone. Fine, she said. But if this goes badly, you're all terrible people and I'm leaving you to die alone, and I'm not even going to pretend to feel bad about it. Noted? Dana said, completely unbothered. She pressed call. And she laughed. She actually laughed as she held the phone to her ear because of course this was absurd. Of course Elise wouldn't even pick up. It was almost 11 at night on a Friday. She'd be asleep or working or perfectly reasonably unavailable, and Maya could hand the phone back and say, see. Tried, done, honor satisfied. Hella. Maya's laughter stopped. That voice. Low, a little careful, with the particular quality of someone who had been awake and thinking, and not expecting interruption, but not unpleasantly surprised by it either. Not groggy, present. That was Elise's voice at 11 on a Friday night, and Elise had picked up. Maya locked eyes with Dana across the room. Dana's hand flew to her mouth. Priya grabbed Sasha's arm. Nobody breathed. Hello. Elise said again, more gently this time. Maya? Is that you? Maya's heart turned over completely. Elise had said her name first. She had Elise's contact saved, of course. But the reverse meant Elise had hers, had it in a place where her name came up on a high. Friday night call, and Elise had looked at it and chosen to answer. She didn't know then, sitting on that floor. Wine-warm and suddenly breathless, with 3 women staring at her with barely contained hysteria that this phone call was going to change everything. That 5 minutes was going to become 5 hours spread across the night. That the nervous laughter was going to become something she'd carry with her for the rest of her life, as the moment things tipped from possible to actual. She only knew that Elise had picked up. That Elise had said her name first. That her own pulse was doing something almost embarrassing, and that she needed to say something before the silence became its own answer. Hey. Maya said at last, and her voice came out softer than she'd intended. Yeah, it's me. Elise Hartwell had not intended to be awake at 11 on a Friday night. She had intended to be asleep by 10, like the sensible, disciplined person she occasionally managed to be, when her brain agreed to cooperate with the schedule she set for it, which was less often than she'd like. Instead, she was sitting at her drafting table in the good lamp's circle of light with a set of blueprints for a community library project she'd been hired to consult on. And she was thinking, as she often did on Friday nights when the week's professional armor came off and the city quieted to its low background. Hum about loneliness. Not the dramatic kind of loneliness. Not the sharp kind. Just the ordinary, persistent, thoroughly unremarkable kind that was simply the condition of her life at 41. Good at her work, respected in her field. Possessed of real friendships and a full enough schedule and an apartment she'd made into something beautiful, and still, in the deepest running part of herself, reaching for something she hadn't quite named or fully allowed herself to want. She was good at not quite allowing herself to want things. She had learned this skill early and refined it through years of practice. It was efficient. It was self-protective. It was also, she was beginning to understand, a way of keeping herself at a slight remove from her own life, as if she were a consultant on her own existence rather than the person living it. She'd been thinking about that when the phone rang. Maya's name on the screen did something it always did when it appeared. It moved something through her. A current she'd learned to identify and to manage. To appreciate from behind glass. Maya Chen was. She had many words for Maya Chen. All of them carefully organized and controlled, all of them true, none of them complete. Brilliant and occasionally infuriating in the best way. Funny with a genuine sharpness that surprised Elise every time, even though she should have stopped being surprised by now. Brown eyes that seemed to read rooms and people and unspoken things with an accuracy that was either gift or long practice or both. Dark hair worn in different configurations depending on her mood in a way Elise had unconsciously catalogued over 2 years. A laugh that started slow and built and ended in something open and unguarded that was, if Elise was honest with herself, the sound she'd most looked forward to on the occasions. They were in the same room. She'd been careful with her feelings about Maya for 2 years and 3 months. She'd been very good at it. She'd not been happy about how good at it she was. She picked up. Hello there. Was a pause, a fraction of a second, and then she heard it. A laugh being swallowed. The background sounds of other voices being suddenly hushed, the specific silence of a group trying very hard not to make noise. A gathering of breath. And under all of that, something that sounded like surprise and something that sounded like relief. Hey, yeah, it's me. Maya's voice sounded different at 11 at night. It had lost the professional gathering layer it sometimes had when they met in work context. And it had lost even the particular warmth of their lunch conversations, which were warm enough that Elise had sometimes sat across from her and had to have a brief internal conversation about the necessity of finishing her food. This was a different Maya, looser, more unguarded, the voice of someone who hadn't been performing anything all evening, and it showed. It was Elise's favorite version of Maya's voice, and she'd only heard it a handful of times. Are you okay? Elise asked because that was always her first question with Maya. Not because Maya seemed like a person who needed worrying about, she was exactly the opposite. She was the person other people called when they needed studying, but because Elise genuinely wanted to know. Always, and the phone call at 11 at night was unusual enough to warrant asking. Yes. I'm at Dana's. We were. A pause in which Elise could almost hear Maya deciding how much to tell her. Playing a game. I may have been dared to call you. Elise felt something warm and complicated settle in her chest. She set down her pencil. Outside, the city made its low, persistent sound. The blueprints on her desk could wait. Ah, she said. And how long do you have to keep me on the phone? 5 minutes. A beat. But I actually wanted to call you. I just needed an excuse. That's a weird thing to say, I'm sorry. Elise was quiet for a moment. The honest thing that was exactly true pressed against the inside of her chest, and she waited. The way she always weighed things, and she thought, I'm done with careful. And she said it. It's not a weird thing to say, yeah? No, I've wanted to call you a dozen times with no good reason. I never do. The pause on the other end was longer this time. Elise heard through the phone. The quiet sounds of Maya moving the shift of fabric against a floor, the soft closing of a door. The particular quality of silence that meant she'd stepped away from the group and found a private space. Coming closer in the way that mattered. You've wanted to call me? Maya said, and her voice was entirely different now. Not louder or softer. Just for Elise, quiet and direct and without the layer of lightness she sometimes used as deflection. Yes, Elise said simply. 5 minutes came and went without comment from either of them. They talked about the library project Elise was consulting on and a documentary Maya had watched the previous weekend about bioluminescent creatures in the deep ocean, which she described with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found an unexpected religion. They talked about a conversation Maya had overheard on the subway that she'd been turning over all week to strangers, debating the ethics of telling someone their partner was cheating, and they talked about it with a genuine disagreement of people who respected each other's thinking and found it interesting to be on different sides. Elise talked about loneliness. Not all of it, the night wasn't old enough yet for all of it, but she mentioned it. The edges of it, the Friday night quality of it. And Maya received it with the listening that was one of the things Elise most valued in her, the kind that didn't rush to fill the space or fix the feeling. That just held it for a moment and acknowledged it. They talked for 2 hours. When they finally said goodnight reluctantly, with the quality of a conversation that could have continued but recognized the hour, Maya's voice carried something new in it. Something tentative and careful and entirely unlike her usual confident ease. And it matched exactly the feeling in Elise's chest when she set down the phone and sat alone in her warm circle of lamplight. She understood something very clearly in that moment. She'd been careful for 2 years, and being careful was no longer going to be possible. She no longer particularly wanted it to be. She looked at her phone for a long time, then she sent a text. I want to have dinner with you. Not lunch. Dinner. This weekend, if you're free. She watched the 3 dots appear almost immediately. Maya was still awake, still holding her own phone in some private corner of Dana's apartment. The reply was one word. Yes. Elise set the phone down and looked at the blueprints and the lamp in the quiet apartment and felt very distinctly like a door she'd been standing in front of for a long time had just opened. They had met at a professional conference 2 years and 3 months before the phone call, on a Tuesday in early July when the city was too hot and the conference center's air conditioning was working at a level of aggressive dedication that made every room approximately 20 degrees colder than the room's purposes required. Maya had been on a panel about sustainable urban design, specifically the integration of green infrastructure into dense residential development, a topic she cared about with genuine conviction and had opinions on that she was not shy about sharing. She was good at panels. She was the panelist who made it feel like a conversation rather than a series of prepared statements, who listened to the other panelists and built on what they said, who made the audience feel like their questions were the interesting part rather than the formality at the end. Elise had been in the audience. Not specifically for the panel, she'd been at the conference for a keynote on structural innovation that morning. But because her colleague, James, had said there was a woman on the sustainable design panel who had done interesting work on a residential project in the East Side that Elise had admired from the outside while walking past it last fall out, the seats at the back were already full when they arrived. She'd ended up 3 rows from the front, directly in Maya's natural sightline. Halfway through the panel, Maya had looked directly at her. Not in the general room-sweeping way that speakers sometimes used as a performance of inclusion. Actually at her, with a slight pause in her sentence that recovered so quickly that the moderator didn't notice, and the other panelists didn't notice, and only Elise, who had been paying the particular quality of attention that you pay when you realize you've been paying attention, noticed the pause at all. She noticed it. And she noticed that Maya noticed that she'd noticed. And there was a moment, just a fraction of a moment, before Maya smoothly continued and the panel moved on. Afterward, at the conference cocktail hour, in the large beige room with its perfectly mediocre wine and its groupings of professionally dressed people performing networking, Maya had appeared at Elise's elbow. She'd been carrying 2 glasses of white wine, and she offered one to Elise with a directness that bypassed the usual preamble of professional introduction entirely. "You were in the front," Maya said. "You had a great skeptical face during the section on thermal massing." Elise looked at her. Up close, Maya Chen was even more, there was no other word for it, vivid than she'd been at panel distance. Like someone who'd been printed in a higher resolution than the room around her. "I wasn't skeptical," Elise said. "I was interested." "Those are different expressions." "Oh, good." Maya's smile was quick and real and slightly self-amused. "Because I made up half of what I said about thermal massing, and I was hoping no one in the front rows had noticed." Elise laughed, startled. It was exactly not the kind of thing professionals said to other professionals at professional events. It was honest, and it was funny, and it was slightly incriminating, and she liked it completely. They talked for an hour. The cocktail hour ended and the room thinned, and they continued talking. Elise gave Maya her card. Maya looked at it the way she looked at things she wanted to remember, really looked at it, with the focused attention that Elise would come to recognize as one of her qualities. She texted the next morning with a link to an actual peer-reviewed paper on thermal massing that was, in fact, better sourced than what she'd said at the panel, and a note that said, "Continuing my education." Elise texted back. That was how it started. What followed was the particular education. In delayed gratification that was 2 years of being close to someone and not being close. Enough, lunches that stretched past the professional into something warmer and harder to categorize. Texts that started with work, "Did you see the announcement about the waterfront development? What's your read on this?" and ended somewhere else entirely, in the territory of small personal things. Funny observations, a book one of them had read. A thought that seemed worth sharing with exactly this person. 100 small moments that accumulated without resolution, like a building's foundation being laid in the dark, out of sight, underground. Before anything could be seen from the outside, Elise sometimes laid it out for herself like a set of blueprints, when she needed to understand something clearly. Here is what I know. Here is what I can observe. Here is the structure of it when viewed without the distortion of wishful thinking or fearful thinking. The structure, viewed with professional objectivity, looked very much like 2 people who wanted each other and had arranged, through some careful mutual and unspoken agreement, not to say so. It looked like deliberate proximity and managed distance. It looked like the floor plan of a building with no door in one particular wall. She didn't know, or told herself she didn't know, whether Maya was queer. The truth, the more honest truth she acknowledged in her more honest moments, was that she had reasons to think Maya was. The neutral pronouns Maya used when speaking about her romantic history in professional context. The careful way she referred to past relationships that let the gendering remain ambiguous. The particular way Maya sometimes looked at women. The way she had once, at a work event, rested her hand on the small of Elise's back for just a moment while guiding them through a crowded corridor, a gesture that could have been entirely platonic and wasn't. Not quite, not with the way Maya had looked at her afterward, with that brief, unguarded intensity-bore looking away. The truth was that Elise suspected. The truth was that she'd been waiting for certainty she could have created herself by simply asking. And she hadn't asked, because asking would mean admitting what she wanted. And admitting what she wanted would mean being vulnerable in a way she hadn't been since the 4-year relationship ended. Being careful had kept her safe. It had also cost her things she was only beginning to fully count. After the phone call, she sat in her apartment and counted dots. She sat in the good lamp's circle of light, and she counted what being careful had cost her: the 2 years of managed feeling, the lunches she'd left feeling like she'd held her breath the whole time, the texts she drafted and revised toward neutrality, the 100 moments of almost, and then she held that cost beside 2 hours of Maya's voice in the dark. Warm and unguarded and quietly longing, the math was not complicated. She sent the text. She watched the yes arrive. She went to bed for the first time in months feeling, instead of provisional, like something was about to begin. Maya changed her outfit 4 times. This was not something she did. It was specifically, definitively, not a thing Maya Shin did. She had a strong sense of herself, her style, her presentation. The particular image she'd built through 37 years of being the decisive one. The one with opinions, the one who walked into rooms first. She did not agonize over clothes. She did not stand in front of her open wardrobe at 6:15 on a Saturday evening making small sounds of distress. She had not done this since she was approximately 16 and had largely regarded it as a part of herself she'd outgrown. And yet, the problem, she understood, was not the clothes. The problem was the stakes, which were larger than she'd allowed herself to fully feel before she'd said yes and put down the phone. At which point they had arrived all at once with the force of a thing that had been held back a long time. She had said yes, before she'd even processed the full sentence. Her thumb had moved independently of any conscious decision, as if some part of her that was more honest and less managed than her usual self had simply been waiting for this specific ask. Yes, one word. Sent at 1 a.m. And then she'd sat in Dana's guest bathroom, which she'd retreated to for the duration of the call and hadn't left, staring at the exchange on her screen with her heart running at a pace she normally reserved for situations that genuinely required fight or flight. Dinner, not lunch. Elise had specified not lunch. The distinction meant everything, and she knew it meant everything, and she was not in the habit of pretending things meant less than they did. She finally settled on a dark green wrap dress she'd bought 6 months ago on a whim, because the color was right and it fit well, and she'd thought at the time that she was buying it for some occasion that hadn't arrived yet. This, apparently, was the occasion. Dana had texted that morning. How did it go? And then, a minute later, I'm asking for science. And then, 3 minutes after that, also because I love you and I need to know. Maya had replied only, I'll tell you everything later, which was both true and a way of protecting the fragile thing until she understood it well enough to share it without losing its shape. The restaurant Elise had suggested was small and warm, tucked into a side street in the old part of the city that had somehow managed to avoid the particular blandness of recent development in a building that had been something else before, and retained the character of that something else in its high ceiling and its original tile and its way of making the space around too. People feel private without being isolated. Low lights. Real candles. A menu that changed weekly and was handwritten and contained nothing that needed explaining. The kind of restaurant that took dinner seriously without being solemn about it. Maya arrived 3 minutes early, which meant she had time to stand outside in the October air with her hands in her coat pockets and breathe. The street was quiet. The evening was that particular October temperature that was cold enough to be crisp, but not cold enough to be punishing. She looked up at the sliver of sky above the buildings and thought, I'm about to have dinner with Elise Hartwell, who told me last night she'd wanted to call me a dozen times without reason. And my heart has been doing something unreliable ever since, she breathed. She was fine. She was always fine, and then Elise came around the corner and she was not fine at all. In the best possible way. Elise was wearing a coat Maya hadn't seen before, deep navy. Very well tailored, the kind of coat that was clearly chosen with care. Her dark hair was down, which it almost never was in professional contexts, and it changed her face slightly, made her look like a different version of herself, or perhaps a truer one. She was carrying a small bunch of flowers, dahlias, in deep orange and wine red, held with the slight awkwardness of someone who was not completely sure they'd made the right call but had committed anyway. She saw Maya and stopped walking. Right there on the sidewalk, she stopped, and for a moment they just looked at each other across 15 feet of street. "I brought flowers," Elise said when she reached her. Which is either charming or alarming, I genuinely wasn't sure. Maya laughed. And it was her real laugh, the one that started slow and built properly, and she took the flowers and held them against her coat and said, "It's extremely charming." For the record, something in Elise's expression shifted. Not dramatically, not in any way that a stranger would have noticed. Just a loosening of something held. A small opening, like a window letting in October air. "Good," Elise said. "Shall we go in?" "Yes," Maya said. Dinner lasted 3 hours. They ate slowly and talked the way they had on the phone, easily, following threads wherever they led. Moving from topic to topic with the organic logic of two people who were interested in the same things and interested in each other's thinking about those things. They talked about the library project and a building Elise had driven past in the suburbs that had made her pull over and think for 20 minutes about municipal architecture and what it communicated to the people who used it. They talked about Maya's most recent project, the residential complex she'd been sustainability consulting on, which had produced a client relationship that was either professionally interesting or professionally exhausting depending on the hour, but it was different from lunch. Fundamentally, structurally different. Not because they talked about different things, they talked about many of the same things they talked about at lunch, but because the frame was different, the context was different. And they were both in this different frame. Differently present. At lunch, Maya had always been aware of the performance aspect. The awareness that she was a professional having lunch with another professional, that her feelings were a private matter to be managed, that the warmth between them was collegial and should be represented as such. She'd been excellent at it. She'd found it increasingly exhausting. Here there was no performance. Or rather, the performance was different. They were two people who had acknowledged, without quite using the words, that they were here for personal reasons. And that acknowledgement changed everything that happened inside it. Maya watched Elise across the table and thought, "I have been in the same room as this woman for 2 years, and I have only ever seen her from behind glass." Elise had a dry, quiet wit that she almost never deployed in professional settings, and that here she let run freely. And it was very good, the kind of wit that depended on timing and a certain amount of trust. That didn't work unless the audience knew to listen for it. She talked about her work with real, unmanaged passion. She asked questions that were actually questions, that assumed Maya had things to say worth hearing. She ordered the duck decisively, and then, when Maya admitted she was curious about it, divided her plate with a fork and slid half toward Maya with the casual ease of someone who shared food with people they cared about, and didn't need to perform the gesture. It was such a small thing. And it undid Maya almost completely. "Can I ask you something?" Maya said. Around the time the dessert arrived, they'd ordered it mostly to extend the evening. A shared creme brulee that neither of them was particularly hungry for. "Yes," Elise said immediately. "Why did you say dinner instead of lunch?" Elise was quiet for a moment. She looked at her hands and then at Maya with the expression of someone choosing honesty. "Because I've been having lunch with you for 2 years," she said. "And every time I leave, I feel like I've been holding my breath the whole time. Not in a bad way, I don't mean it's unpleasant. I mean that I'm managing what I'm saying and what I'm showing and what I'm letting myself feel. I thought if we had dinner instead, maybe I could breathe." Maya held very still. "And can you?" she asked. "Breathe?" Elise looked at her across the table in the candlelight. With the flowers in a water glass between them, the restaurant had been very accommodating about the flowers, and she said, "Yes, actually, I can." Maya reached across the table, just rested her fingers against Elise's hand, lightly, a question so small it could be missed, or accepted. Elise turned her hand over, closed her fingers gently around Maya's. "Anne?" Answer that was completely clear. They stayed until the restaurant was nearly empty and the candles had burnt to their last inch. And the waiter had very tactfully brought the bill without being asked, and then tactfully disappeared again. They walked out into the October air and stood on the sidewalk under the street lamp, and neither of them moved to say goodnight. "I don't want to go home yet," Maya said. "Neither do I," said Elise. They walked for 2 hours. Through the old streets and the newer ones, past the lit windows of other people's evenings. along the canal that ran through the middle of the city and reflected the sky back in dark water. They talked and sometimes didn't talk. And their hands found each other and separated and found each other again with the tentative frequency of something new, when they finally stopped at the entrance to Maya's building. Elise looked at her with the expression. Maya had been cataloging all evening, careful and open and uncertain and wanting, and Maya kissed her, softly, not tentatively but softly. The way you kiss someone when you want them to know it's a beginning and not a resolution. That you're here and you're choosing this and there's more. When they separated, Elise was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, and it was the most unguarded thing Maya had ever seen on her face, wide and slightly surprised and entirely real. "Good night," Elise said. "Good night," Maya said. She watched Elise walk to the end of the street. Watched her reach the corner and turn, and at the turn Elise looked back once. And even from the distance, Maya could see the quality of that last look. Not uncertainty, not goodbye. Just, "I know where you are." And then she was gone. Maya went inside and leaned against the door of her apartment and stood there in the dark hallway and felt, very simply, like something had started. Like a building had finally broken ground. After 2 years of planning and the structure was going up. What followed was the particular delight of falling in love. When you are old enough to know better and young enough not to care. Old enough to understand what you're doing and why it's complicated and what the risks are. Young enough or brave enough or simply tired enough of holding back to do it anyway. They were both past 35. They had both been careful and had been hurt and had built themselves back with the materials at hand and known the vocabulary of endings. And because of all that, they treated the beginning with a reverence that was conscious and chosen a deliberate savoring. An awareness that this was not something to rush through in the excitement of the early days, but something to build well from the beginning, the first week after the dinner. Texts that started at 3 a day and climbed and settled into something steady. A constant low current of connection that ran through the ordinary workday. That surfaced during coffee and during the walk to the subway and during the moment at 8 in the evening, when the day wound down and you looked at your phone and thought of the person you wanted to talk to. Work things shared in a new context. Personal things that hadn't been shared before because there hadn't been a clear invitation. Questions that were really ways of saying, "I'm thinking about you and I wanted you to know." The second week, a Sunday afternoon at the city's Modern Art Museum, where a new collection had opened that Elise wanted to see and Maya had been meaning to get to. They arrived at noon and stayed until 5. They stood in front of a large abstract canvas, primarily ultramarine with strata of other colors beneath, geological, for almost 20 minutes. Which was unusual behavior even for people who liked art. Elise spoke about what she saw in it with the precision she brought to spatial things. The relationship between the colors at the edges and the weight of the dark center. The way the viewer's eye was directed without being directed. Maya argued, cheerfully and specifically, that meaning in abstract work was entirely constructed by the viewer and that Elise was describing her own architecture, not the artist's. They ended up in the museum cafe talking about objective meaning for an hour after closing time, until a patient staff member gently indicated the direction of the exit. Maya liked the arguing. She had not expected to like it so much. With past partners, disagreement had always carried a slight charge of threat, the risk that difference of opinion would reveal fundamental incompatibility, that the argument itself was a sign of something wrong. With Elise, the arguments were different in kind. They were two people who trusted each other's minds and wanted to see how the other thought, who found disagreement interesting rather than dangerous. Elise didn't yield to make peace. Maya had expected she wouldn't, and was right. She held her positions with the same care she gave her design work. And she listened to Maya's counter-arguments with real attention. And she changed her mind when something actually moved her and she said so. "You've made me reconsider," Elise said once. During a sustained disagreement about the ethics of a particular development project they were both aware of. "I don't say that often." "I know," Maya said. "That's why it means something when you do." Elise looked at her with that expression, the one Maya was accumulating. The one that said things Elise hadn't said in words yet and didn't answer. The third week, Elise cooked dinner at her apartment. This was presented as a casual thing and was clearly not a casual thing. Which Maya found perfect. The performance of casualness around something that mattered was a way of saying, "I want this to be easy between us." Even though it matters, even though I'm nervous, Maya was nervous too, though for different reasons than she'd anticipated. She'd been to Elise's apartment before twice, for brief professional reasons, and had managed those visits with the managed quality of all their interactions. Now, let in with no agenda except dinner, she moved through the apartment slowly and let herself actually see it. It was Elise in the way that a person's home is always them, but specifically, completely. The precision and the warmth. The books arranged in a system that made immediate sense when you understood it. The drafting table in the corner covered in the beautiful organized chaos of active work. The record player and the vinyl that told you in one glance who she'd been at 20, and what she'd kept from that person and what she'd added since. Small objects with obvious meaning in specific places, a piece of sea glass on the windowsill, a photograph from somewhere coastal, a small bowl of smooth river stones. Maya stopped at the record collection. She pulled out a sleeve at random, late period. Miles Davis. She put it back and pulled another, a collection of Brazilian bossa nova recordings from the 60s. Another, folk, a woman singer she'd never heard of. The cover worn at the edges from repeated handling. The bossa nova was a gift from my sister, Elise said from the kitchen doorway, having appeared without Maya noticing. The folk is mine. I found it in a record shop in a town I was passing through on a road trip 8 years ago. I still don't know who she is. The album has no liner notes, but I've listened to it probably 100 times. Maya looked at her. That's one of the most romantic things I've ever heard someone say about a record. Elise looked briefly surprised, as if she hadn't considered it from that angle. I suppose it is, she said. And she went back to the kitchen. Dinner was slow-cooked and genuinely excellent. The record player cycled through 2 albums. The wine was the kind Elise had clearly chosen with care and wasn't saying much about. They sat at the kitchen table and talked, and the conversation had the quality that their best conversations always had the sense of following something real, of both of them being fully in it. After dinner, Elise picked up the novel she'd been reading and said, with the casualness of someone making a small offer, "Would you like to hear some of this?" Maya, who had never had someone read to her as an adult and had not considered whether she'd want it, said yes without thinking. Elise read to her for an hour. Her voice was, as it turned out, exactly made for reading aloud, careful and warm, with pauses in the right places, with attention to the rhythm of sentences. The novel was something Maya hadn't read. A cumulative thing about a family across several generations. And the passage Elise read from was toward the end. After you'd presumably been with these people for hundreds of pages, and even without that context, it was beautiful. Maya fell asleep against Elise's shoulder, which was mortifying. She woke when the record ended, the silence of the needle reaching the end of the groove and cycling back, and the room was quiet and warm, and Elise was still there. Still awake, the book in her lap, one hand resting with undemanding lightness in Maya's hair. I fell asleep, Maya said, horrified. I know, Elise said, and her voice had such gentleness in it that the horror dissolved before it could establish itself. It's late. You should stay. Okay, Maya said, before she could think too much about it. She stayed. They lay in the dark and talked about small things. The book. A dream Maya had recently had that she'd been meaning to tell someone. What they each wanted from the next year, professionality, the small things ran out and they didn't. And in the morning, Elise made coffee with the quiet efficiency of someone in their own kitchen. And Maya sat on the kitchen counter and watched her and thought, I am in love with this woman, not going to be. Not in the process of falling, already. Fully, looking at Elise in her kitchen in the early morning light, with her hair still down and a coffee cup in each hand, and a small focused expression of domestic attention on her face. Maya was already completely in love. She'd been, she suspected, for 2 years. She had simply been very good at not knowing it. Elise had come out twice. The first time was to herself at 23, in the private and illuminating and somewhat terrible way that required no audience and left everything permanently altered. She had been living in a city where she knew almost no one, in her first real professional job. In an apartment she'd furnished with a combination of things left by previous tenants and things she'd carried from home in a borrowed car. She'd been building her life with the focused energy of someone who had an idea of who they wanted to become. And then one evening she'd gone to a gallery opening with a colleague and met the colleague's friend. And that friend had looked at her and said something ordinary and entirely unremarkable. And Elise had understood in the particular way that understanding arrives without warning or preparation, that she'd been building a life for a person who was somewhat larger than she'd been allowing for. She'd sat with that for a year before she told anyone. Not from shame, she didn't feel shame, or not much, or not in a way that lasted, but from the need to have something be hers before it became anyone else's knowledge of her. She was a person who needed things to settle into their true form before she could present them. The second coming out was to her family at 27, which required a different kind of courage because it had witnesses and consequences, and the particular vulnerability of being someone's child, telling them something about yourself that you know is going to change how they see you. At least for a while. Her parents were good people. She has always said this first and meant it, because they were loving and present and interested in her life, and had given her a childhood that she remembered with genuine warmth. But good people can need time, and they needed time. And she had given it to them. For 2 years she had felt slightly provisional in her own family, like a room that had been redecorated and was still being adjusted to. Not excluded, not unloved, just uncertain in her footing in a way that was new for her there. And then one Sunday her mother called. She'd been at her drafting table, which was her habit on Sunday mornings. She picked up expecting her mother's voice in its usual Sunday register, checking in, asking about work, the comfortable routine of it. Instead, her mother had said, "I've been thinking about what you told us, and I want you to know that you are my daughter and I love you completely, and I should have said that right away. I'm sorry it took me this long." Elise had held the phone and stood very still, and cried in the way you cry when something you'd quietly grieved, the loss who comes back. Her father had expressed his arrival differently. He had quietly, without announcement, simply begun to refer to whoever you end up with in neutral terms, in that particular way that men of his generation sometimes chose to communicate acceptance through small adjustments to language rather than direct conversation. The practical rather than the emotional demonstration of having done the internal work. She told Maya some of this on a Saturday afternoon in the 4th week, when they were walking along the river path in the late October light that was amber and low and moving through the turning leaves in a way that made the whole city look like a painting of itself. She told her the shape of it, the 2-year gap, the Sunday phone call, the particular grief of feeling provisional in the place you most need to feel secure. She gave it carefully and not all at once, because she believed in giving things room to be received properly. Maya walked beside her and listened with the quality of attention that Elise had identified early as one of Maya's gifts, and had never stopped being grateful for. The full attention, the kind that didn't plan its response while listening, the kind that made you feel received. My parents both needed time, Maya said when Elise finished. Different amounts. My mom was about a week, which included some crying that was about her process, not about me, and then she arrived on the other side of it completely and has been entirely wonderful ever since. My dad was almost a year. It was the longest year I can remember. What was it like on the other end of it? Elise asked. On the other end of his year? He called me. Maya looked at the river. He didn't say much. He talked about some things at work, a problem with the car, regular dad things. But then before he hung up, he said, "You know I love you." And I said yes. And he said, "Good," and that was it. A pause. But it was everything. Elise thought about this. It's hard when it's the people you most need it to be easy with. She said, "Yes, exactly." Maya looked at her. The river moved beside them, dark and unhurried. I was in love twice before. The first time was at college. She and I were together for 2 years, and it ended badly. Because we were too young and too similar in the wrong ways and too different in the right ways for it to survive us both figuring ourselves out at the same time. The second time was different. She was older, we were both properly adults. It lasted 3 years and ended not in disaster, but in the slow recognition that we'd been trying to make something work that wasn't quite working. But there was love, but not quite the right shape of it. She paused. After that one ended, I spent a while with this theory about myself that maybe I was a person who was good at beginnings, and the middle and not the rest. The part where it's real and ordinary and you're doing life with someone, not just falling into them. I thought maybe I was built for certain stages and not the whole thing. Elise was quiet for a moment. They walked in the amber light. I don't believe it about you, she said. Maya looked at her. I've watched you for 2 years, Elise said. I've watched how you show up for people. Dana, specifically I see how you talk about her, how you prioritize her. That's not someone who doesn't know how to sustain. That's someone who's been giving that quality of care to her friendships. Because it hasn't had somewhere else to go. Maya was quiet for a long time. I want somewhere else for it to go. She said finally. I want a person. The whole thing. All the stages. Elise took her hand. They walked without speaking for a while, the city going golden around them, the river moving, the leaves releasing and falling. I want that too, Elise said. I've wanted it for a long time. Maya stopped walking. She turned to face Elise there on the riverside path with the late afternoon light on both of them, and she looked at her, with those eyes that read things. And she said, then let's try. Okay, Elise said. Yes, let's try. The simplest things were always like this. They looked enormous from a distance, and when you said them, they were just words, just breath. And the meaning was all in what you did with them after. Maya told Dana on a Tuesday morning, which was the first morning she could reasonably get away from work at a time when Dana's coffee shop opened and their usual corner table was available. She told her everything in order, which was how Maya told things when they mattered, not the highlights first. Not the summary, but the full sequence. Because the sequence was the point. Dana listened with the expression of someone receiving confirmation of something they believed for a long time. She didn't interrupt. She held her coffee cup in both hands and listened until Maya finished, and then she made the specific sound of someone who has been vindicated. The dare phone call. Dana said, was the best thing you ever made me do. Maya said, I knew it. Dana pointed with her spoon. She always pointed with whatever was in her hand. I absolutely knew it. I want you to know that I've been running a low-level intelligence operation on your feelings about Elise Hartwell for approximately 8 months. Ever since the symposium last spring when you came back from her keynote and talked about it for 45 minutes and then said, anyway. She's interesting, as if that was a normal amount of interest. That's an invasion of privacy. Maya said, it's friendship, Dana said. There's overlap. You could have just asked me. I did ask you. You said she was a colleague you respected. 3 separate times on 3 separate occasions you used those exact words. A colleague I respect. I decided intel was the more useful approach. Maya laughed. She told Dana about the dinner, the flowers and the duck in the hand, and the walk through the October streets and the kiss outside her building. She told it well, with the specific detail that mattered and the pauses in the right places. And Dana listened and made the right sounds, small sounds of appreciation. One sharp intake of breath at the hand moment, one long exhale at the kiss. Priya, who had received a text summary the morning after the dare call and had been impatiently waiting for the full debrief, called in from between yoga classes and listened on speakerphone. She reads to you, Priya said, with the weight of someone who had just heard something that they found cosmically significant. She read to me and I fell asleep and she kept reading. Maya said. The silence on the speakerphone was almost reverent. Maya, Priya said with the certainty of someone delivering a prophecy. You are going to marry this woman. It's been 3 weeks, Maya said, in the voice of someone who didn't entirely disagree. 3 weeks and 2 years, Dana said. Because we are counting the whole time. We are absolutely counting the thermal massing conference and every lunch and every text and every time you got the look. What look? Maya said. Dana demonstrated the look. She did it carefully and thoroughly, and it was, Maya had to admit, devastatingly accurate. The slight increase in warmth, the particular quality of attention, the way the corners of the mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile but was adjacent to one. I don't look like that, Maya said. You completely look like that, said Priya from the phone. Every time you talk about her, Dana said. For 8 months at minimum. Probably longer. I wasn't tracking it from the beginning. Maya put her face in her hands. But she was smiling in the way that made the hiding her face gesture entirely unconvincing. Her mother, when told that evening, said finally with such genuine relief and such a specific quality of finally, the finally of a person who's been waiting at a destination for their companion to finish looking at the scenery and arrive, that Maya started laughing. Immediately. What do you mean finally? How would you even know, sweetheart? You've mentioned this woman to me 14 times in the last 2 years. I have a complete portrait of her. I know she has strong opinions about public architecture and a record collection and a sister named Carolyn who has children she adores. I know she gave a keynote speech that you watched from the 3rd row. I know she has green eyes and uses reading glasses at her drafting table and orders decisively at restaurants. You described all of this to me across 14 conversations, as if you were describing a colleague you respected. She is a colleague I respect. She is a colleague you respect and also a woman you are in love with, and I am very glad. You have finally caught up with yourself. Maya was quiet for a moment. Was I that obvious? Only to people who know how to listen to you, her mother said. Only to people who love you. That evening, sitting on the couch in her apartment, Maya texted Elise. Apparently I had been obvious about having feelings for you for 2 years and everyone knew except me. The reply came in under a minute. You weren't the only one. She stared at that message. Then, how long? The 3 dots. The pause. The dots again, honestly? Since the thermal massing. That first night, when you told me you'd made half of it up. 2 years and 3 months. Maya set the phone down on the couch cushion beside her and looked at the ceiling of her apartment, and felt the full weight and the full absurdity and the full beauty of all that time, all those careful lunches. All those managed feelings, all those texts that started with work and landed somewhere warmer. All those moments of almost that had accumulated like a slowly rising waterline. Waiting. She picked up the phone and called. Not because she was dared to. Because she wanted to, because she chose to. Because this was a person she wanted to talk to and she didn't need a reason anymore. Elise picked up on the second ring. We wasted a lot of time. Maya said. We were afraid, Elise said. And now? A pause. Then, now I'm not. Her voice had the quality it got when she was saying something she thought about carefully. Are you? Maya thought about it. She thought about it honestly, the way she could be honest with Elise in a way she sometimes couldn't be with herself. No, she said. Not anymore. November arrived and the city shifted into gray and gold. The trees letting go, the light going lower and more amber. The air acquiring the particular weight of late autumn that Maya had always loved, the quality of everything being stripped back to its essential form. Leaves and pretense both releasing. She and Elise moved through the season like people who had found a new country and were learning its geography, with care and attention and the particular pleasure of exploration that is made better by company. They made habits without particularly intending to. Sunday mornings at Elise's apartment, where a spare coffee mug had appeared in the cabinet and a change of clothes had migrated, and the morning light came through the windows at an angle that Maya had begun to navigate unconsciously, knowing exactly where it fell at 8 and at 10, the way you know the light in a place that has become yours. Thursday evenings at Maya's, which was louder and more colorful and smelled like the rotating selection of candles she burned and the plants she tended with mixed success and the particular warmth of a space that had always been fully, joyfully inhabited. They took turns cooking with the natural ease of 2 people who both liked food and had different skills in producing it. Elise's cooking was precise and flavorful and more technically ambitious than it needed to be, which was characteristic. Maya's was enthusiastic and occasionally improvised and sometimes resulted in things that were better than they had any right to be and sometimes resulted in things they ordered pizza instead of finishing. Elise never made her feel bad about the pizza. That mattered. They had their first fight in the 3rd week of November. On a Wednesday evening when they were both tired and the day had been the particular kind of professionally abrasive day that leaves you with less grace than you need. And a scheduling conflict on a shared project became, for about 40 minutes, a conversation about something much larger than the scheduling conflict. You make decisions for us without telling me, Maya said. And I know you're not doing it deliberately, but the effect is that I find out about things that affect both of us after you've already decided them. Elise was quiet for a long moment. The quality of her quiet when she was listening and processing was different from her quiet when she was closed off, and Maya had learned to hear the difference. You're right, Elise said finally. I do that. It's a habit from working alone for a long time, and I haven't adjusted fully. I'm sorry. It was such a simple response. No defensiveness. No counter-accusation. Just, you're right, I do that. I'm sorry. Thank you, Maya said, and then because she was being honest, I also pushed too hard earlier. I could see you were tired and I kept at it anyway. I'm sorry for that. You were frustrated, Elise said. I was. But I can be frustrated and still be fair. Elise looked at her. Then she reached across the kitchen table and took Maya's hand. They talked for another hour. Not about the conflict, but about the things underneath the conflict, how they communicated. What they needed, what felt easy and what was harder. With the kind of directness that was only possible between people who had decided that the relationship was worth being uncomfortable for. I need you too. Tell me when I'm closing off, Elise said. I do it and I don't notice I'm doing it. I need you to tell me when I'm too much, Maya said. When I'm pushing past what the moment needs. You're not too much, Elise said. Not yet, Maya said. But it's possible. I know myself. If it ever is, Elise said, I'll tell you. That's what you're asking for, right? Just tell me. Yes, Maya said. Then yes. I'll tell you. Elise squeezed her hand. And you'll tell me, yes. They came through the first fight knowing each other better than they had before it. That was the thing about conflict between people who were genuinely trying it, built something if you let it. They met each other's people. Maya met James at a dinner in late November, Elise's closest friend, whom she'd known since graduate school, who had the manner of someone who kept careful track of people he cared about and who communicated approval in economical, dry observations rather than effusive declarations. He told Maya at one point with complete casualness, "She's more like herself around you than I've seen her in years. I thought you should know that." She met Carolyn at a family dinner in December. And Carolyn was everything Elise had described: louder, faster, funnier, immediately warm in a way that was simultaneously its own thing and completely consistent with the same root as Elise's quieter warmth. Carolyn pulled Maya aside at the end of the evening. 7 years, she said, since she's introduced anyone to me. You know that? I didn't, Maya said. Now you do. So you understand what this is. Carolyn looked at her with eyes that were her sister's eyes in a different context. And so you understand that if you're not serious, you should be serious about not being serious, if you follow me. I follow you, Maya said. Good. Carolyn seemed satisfied. She talks about you differently than she talks about work. I've been listening to her talk about her work for 20 years. This is different. How is it different? Carolyn considered. She uses more words, she said. Elise is economical. With you, she's less economical. More like herself. As James probably told you. He said something like that, Maya admitted. Carolyn nodded. The people who love her have been watching you happen for a while, she said. We're glad you arrived. Maya met Elise's friends. Elise met Maya's. The groups, over a series of dinners and outings, began to know each other and formed their own connections, Dana and James, discovering a shared and specific appreciation for natural wine and the kind of argumentative conversation that sounded like fighting but was actually deeply enjoyed by everyone involved. Priya and Carolyn finding, over a mutual yoga-related injury, that they'd both competed in long-distance triathlons and had the particular bond of people who understood a very specific kind of voluntary suffering. At one of those gatherings, Sasha, who had navigated the shift from married couple's friend to independent social presence with more grace than she'd given herself credit for, found in Elise a conversation partner of the particular quality she'd been looking for. After an hour of sustained conversation about urban planning and the ethics of gentrification, Sasha told Maya, I like your person. She thinks clearly and doesn't pretend the world is simpler than it is. She's the best person I know, Maya said. And meant it completely. Sasha looked at her with the expression of someone who had recently been through a marriage ending and recognized, in Maya's statement, something worth having. Then keep her, she said. That's the plan, Maya said. The city put up its holiday lights in early December, and they came home one evening to find the street outside their respective apartments transformed, which felt that year like an event that was specifically for them. They spent a Sunday at the holiday market in the park stalls, selling handmade things and roasted nuts and warm drinks in paper cups. The air cold enough to see breath, the city in the particular festive mood that Maya had always loved and had sometimes, in previous Decembers, found tinged with the specific loneliness of a celebration that assumed company. This year there was company. This year there was Elise beside her, wearing the navy coat, examining a hand-turned wooden bowl with the expression she wore when she was assessing something aesthetically. And Maya thought, this is what I was missing in those other Decembers. Not a party, not an event. Just a person to walk through it with. Elise bought her a small ceramic whale from a potter's stall, a beautiful thing, glazed in deep blue-green, about the size of a fist. For the bioluminescence, Elise said, when she handed it to her, which was both entirely clear as a reference and a small declaration that she'd been listening and remembering. Maya kept it on her windowsill, where it caught the morning light and glowed. Christmas approached. They'd had a conversation early in December, one of the honest, practical conversations that Elise was very good at initiating when they were needed, about what the holiday actually meant to each of them, what they wanted from it, what the pressures and joys of it were. Not assumed. Asked. What they wanted was remarkably similar, the warmth of family. Yes, but also the particular quiet of a day that belonged entirely to the two of them. Elise's family came from 3 hours away for Christmas Eve. Her parents, Caroline and her husband and their 3 children, and Aunt Elise was fond of, and the evening was loud and warm and full of children's energy and the particular pleasure of being introduced to a family as belonging to someone they loved, Elise's. Mother held Maya's hands when they met and looked at her with the direct warmth of a woman who had learned through some difficulty not to waste time getting to the point of things. She's happy, her mother said, more than she's been in a long time. That matters more to me than anything else you could tell me about yourself. I know, Maya said. I know it matters. Christmas Day was as they planned, just the two of them, at Maya's apartment, cooking a large and unhurried breakfast together. The kind that started with coffee and fruit and added components over the course of an hour. The kitchen warm and the music playing from Maya's phone speaker, and the way that happened on slow mornings when nobody was going anywhere. They exchanged gifts in the afternoon, sitting on the couch with the city's low winter light coming through the windows. Maya gave Elise the book she'd spent 3 weekends tracking down, a first edition of a collection of architectural drawings by a designer Elise had mentioned once, in passing, in a conversation about work, and the finding of it had required the kind of persistence Maya brought to things she cared about. Elise received it the way she received things that moved her, very still, very present, looking at the book and then at Maya. How did you find this? She asked. Carefully, Maya said. Elise gave her the pendant. She'd had it made by a jeweler. She knew a small abstract shape in silver, which, when Maya turned it over and looked at it properly, was recognizably, unmistakably the floor plan of the conference center where they'd met. Not a replica, not labeled, just the shape, abstracted and reduced, small enough to wear. Warm at the collarbone, Maya held it in her palm and looked at it for a long time. Too much? Elise asked, with the slight vulnerability she still sometimes showed when she'd done something that opened her fully, made her legible. The absolute inverse of too much, Maya said. She looked up. This is the most exact present anyone has ever given me. This is us. Yes, Elise said. Maya put it on. She wore it every day from then on. New Year's Eve, a party at a friend of Elise's, in an apartment on the 8th floor with a wide view of the city, full of architects and designers and their people. Good food and better conversation, and the particular ease of a gathering where the host knows exactly who to put together. Maya moved through it with Elise beside her or nearby, and the city was laid out beyond the windows, getting ready to become the next year. At midnight, they stood at the window and the fireworks started, not the major display, just the amateur and small-scale citywide enthusiasm of 1,000 households expressing something. The colored light came through the glass. Elise turned to her. Maya kissed her in the light of the ending year, among people who were glad for them, with the city blazing around them and a whole new year waiting on the other side of midnight. Happy New Year, Elise said quietly, just for Maya. Happy New Year, Maya said. They stayed until the party thinned, and then walked home through the quiet streets of the early morning, through the aftermath of celebration, and the city was still and cold, and theirs, real love, Maya came to understand in the months that followed, was not the beginning and not the crisis. It was not the moment the laugh stopped and the voice came through, not the flowers on the sidewalk, not the kiss and the fireworks. Those were the markers, the memorable things, the moments you tell later. But the love itself, the actual substance, the thing that held was the middle country. The ordinary long train of days, where you chose each other not in dramatic declaration but in small, daily, unremarkable elections, making the coffee before the other person was awake, texting about something small and dumb and finding that the small and dumb things were worth sharing, remembering the thing they'd mentioned worrying about and asking about it, 3 days later in a way that said, I was still thinking about it. Sitting in the same room doing separate things, Elise at the drafting table, Maya at the kitchen table with her laptop and her notes, and finding that the presence itself was the point, the company of it. The quiet knowledge that the person you wanted was within range, showing up to the difficult conversation when it would have been easier to let it pass. Saying the uncomfortable thing rather than the comfortable one because the relationship had become a place where truth was welcome. Apologizing without conditions. Receiving apology without scorekeeping. These were the actual things. The daily repetition of choosing. In February, Elise had a project crisis. A major civic building she'd been lead designer on for 2 years hit a structural complication late in the design development phase, a load-bearing issue that, in the discovery, required 3 weeks of 18-hour days. Missed dinners, canceled plans, and Elise being, as she described it with the honesty she brought to difficult self-assessments, the worst version of myself, the one that goes underground, into work and forgets to surface and doesn't always come back up in good condition. Maya had watched this pattern from the outside for 2 years and recognized it when it arrived up close. She understood what it was. She didn't take it personally. She didn't add the demand of her own emotional needs to a person who was already carrying too much. She showed up with food to the office 3 times in those 3 weeks. Not asking to be let in, not requiring conversation, just leaving things at the desk with a text, just in case. She sent messages that asked nothing of Elise's depleted energy observations, things she'd read. A photograph of the whale on the windowsill catching particularly good light that said only, I see you. I'm here, nothing is required. She was patient not because she'd decided to perform patience, but because she understood the situation and she trusted Elise to come back. On the other end of it, the structural complication resolved, the solution found. The 18-hour days becoming 10-hour days and then regular days again, Elise came back to herself and found Maya exactly where she'd been, uncomplicated and present. Maya had dinner ordered and a film cued and the apartment quiet and warm. You didn't leave, Elise said. Standing in the doorway with her coat still on, looking at Maya on the couch, looking at the evidence of dinner and consideration and 3 weeks of steady, unremarkable presence. Why would I leave? Maya said, I wasn't. I know I was absent. I know I wasn't. You were working the crisis, Maya said. That's allowed. You're a person with a demanding job, and sometimes the job demands a lot. I know who you are. I'm not going anywhere. Because your job is hard. Elise sat down beside her and put her head on Maya's shoulder, and Maya put her arm around her, and they watched the film and ate the food and didn't talk about the crisis or the 3 weeks or the absence. Because all of that had been handled already in the quiet, steady way, and what was needed now was just the regular evening. The ordinary country. The home of it. In March, Maya's father was hospitalized. It was a cardiac event. The phrase itself was terrifying. The word event implying a magnitude, implying something that had occurred and been survived, but that carried its own uncertainty. It turned out, in the first terrible hours before the test results came back, to be less severe than the worst possibilities. But those hours were real, and Maya drove 3 hours in the early morning to the hospital where her parents were waiting. Elise was on the phone with her the entire drive, not talking, necessarily. Mostly there. Sometimes saying something about nothing, about everything, about the drive itself, asking her to describe what she was passing. Keeping her company in the small way that is sometimes the only available way and is sufficient. Saying once, clearly, your father is loved. He's going to be okay. You don't know that, Maya said. No, Elise agreed. But he has people who love him very much, and that matters for what comes next. Whatever comes next. Maya drove and Elise stayed on the line, and the 3 hours passed. Her father was discharged 2 days later. Maya stayed an extra day with her parents and drove back, and Elise was at her apartment. She'd been given the key 2 months before for exactly the kind of situation that required presence without announcement. The apartment was warm and the flowers were fresh, and the chocolate Maya liked was on the counter, the expensive kind. The kind Elise thought was a reasonable splurge for difficult occasions. Maya stood in the kitchen doorway still in her coat and looked at all the flowers. The chocolate, the evidence of someone caring for her life while she was away, and she said, "I love you." The first time. The words arrived before any conscious decision to say them, which was exactly right. When something is entirely true, it doesn't need to be decided. Elise went very still. Then her whole face opened, the way it did when she let herself feel something completely. "I love you too," she said. "I have for a while." "How long?" "Probably since the thermal massing." "Probably from the beginning." Maya crossed the kitchen and held her. Elise held her back. The flowers were on the counter and the chocolate was on the counter, and outside the March rain ran down the windows of the city, and inside the apartment 2 women who had loved each other for a long time stood in the kitchen and finally named it simply and completely. That was what the middle country looked like. That was the thing. The crisis, the waiting, the coffee made before anyone was awake, the food left without requirement, the phone call for 3 hours in the dark, and then "I love you." Yes, from the beginning. I know, me too. There were things Elise carried that she hadn't yet given Maya. Not because she was hiding them, she was committed to honesty in the particular clear-eyed way. She committed to things that mattered. Which meant not half committing, but because she believed in giving things their proper time. Because she knew that some revelations needed the ground to be prepared before they could take root. The primary thing she hadn't said was also the simplest. She was afraid, not a particular small fear, not the manageable kind she knew how to handle. A deeper fear, the kind that arrived with something too good to lose. She was afraid in a way she hadn't been in years. Of losing this, of doing something wrong or inadequate, or simply of the ordinary chaos of 2 lives, however well matched, failing to align in the long run. She had spent 2 years being careful about her feelings for Maya, and then she had stopped being careful, and now she was entirely open. Entirely in it, and being entirely open was the most vulnerable state she knew. With past partners, she had maintained, without fully realizing she was doing it, a room she didn't let people enter, not from dishonesty, but from a habit of self-protection that had become structural. She had loved them from a position of slight reserve. She had never been so unguarded as she was with Maya, who had somehow walked through every door without being given explicit permission, because Maya had a gift for recognizing which things were unlocked even when they weren't obviously open. She told Maya this in April, on a slow Sunday morning in Maya's apartment, in bed in the angled morning light that came through the imperfectly drawn curtains. The kind of morning that felt like stolen time, the city not yet properly awake, no particular requirement on the day. "I'm afraid of losing you," she said. "I want to tell you that, not because I need you to reassure me, not because I'm asking you to manage it. It's not your fear to carry. I say it because it's true, and I told myself I would tell you true things." Maya was quiet. The light was pale and still. Elise could feel her listening. "I've never been this open with someone," Elise continued. "I'm aware of the vulnerability of it. It doesn't feel unsafe. It feels like exactly what I want, exactly the right place to be. But it also means more is at stake than I've had at stake before. And I've been sitting with that, and I think the honest thing is to say it out loud rather than carry it alone." Maya turned onto her side to face her. The morning light on her face made her look exactly like herself. "What made it possible to be open with me?" she asked. Genuinely asking, not performing the question. Elise thought about it with care. "You don't need me to be manageable," she said. "Every other context in my life, professional and personal, I've had this ambient sense that the most convenient version of me is what's wanted. The version that doesn't complicate things, that's always competent, but handles her own feelings efficiently. With you, I've never felt that. You seem interested in the actual version, the complicated one, the one with rough edges and fears and the habit of disappearing into work. You seem to find that version preferable to the convenient one." "I do," Maya said immediately. I know, Elise said. And it made space for me to be it. With you, the actual version of me feels possible in a way it hasn't felt before. Maya was quiet for a moment. The city was starting to wake, beginning to make its morning sounds through the window. You're going to keep having me, Maya said then, quietly and directly. I'm not going anywhere. Not because I promise not to, but because I don't want to. I want to be here. That's not going to change. Elise received that fully. Let it in without qualifying it or holding it at arm's length. Thank you for the true things, Maya said. Thank you for receiving them, Elise said. You do the same, Maya said. You receive the hard things. When I told you about the theory I had about myself, that I wasn't built for the long thing, you didn't dismiss it or rush to reassure me. You received it and you disagreed with evidence. That matters. To be disagreed with well. That takes a specific kind of respect. Elise looked at her. You deserve to be disagreed with well, she said. You deserve all of it. The careful arguments and the complete honesty and the 2 years of wanting to call and the flowers that weren't wrong. All of it. Maya laughed quietly. Then she moved closer and Elise held her in the morning light and the city made its morning sounds and the fears. Were not gone. Fears don't work by being announced, but they were held. And held together was different from held alone. That was the thing about trust, built properly over time and honesty. It didn't eliminate fear. It gave you something real to put beside it. Something that said, I know this fear. I'm here anyway. The fear is not the largest thing in this room. Doubt it was Dana who said it first. As Dana often said the true things first, over coffee at their usual table on a Tuesday morning in August. Almost a full year after the dare. Have you talked about living together? Maya looked at our coffee. It's come up, adjacently. Adjacently, Dana repeated. Obliquely. In passing. In that way where you're both talking around the subject rather than about it. Why around it rather than about it? Maya turned her cup in her hands. We spend 5 nights a week together. Elise's apartment has started to feel, she paused. There's a gravitational center. It's her place. The light in the morning, the record player, the way the kitchen is organized, the way I know exactly where things are and I didn't have to learn it. I know where I am there. I know where home is. So it's a significant thing. Moving in. We haven't been together a year yet by conventional counting, and Maya, Dana put her cup down. 2 years of wanting and 10 months of being together and 5 nights a week. The math is not conventional counting's problem. What if it changes things? Living together always changes things. It's supposed to. What if it changes them in the wrong direction? What if it's 2? That's fear, Dana said, simply. And I say that with love. That's exactly fear talking, and fear is not your best counselor for this particular question. Maya knew she was right. She was always right about this, which was why Maya had been telling her things for 15 years. She also knew that the real shape of her hesitation was not actually about timing or risk or being too fast. The real shape of it was about the size of what she wanted. She wanted all of it. The apartment and the shared mornings and the daily ordinary life that accumulated into years. The bookshelves merged and the coffee made for 2 and the person who was always there. She wanted it so completely that it felt almost safer to. Frame the wanting as caution to stand. Near it rather than in it because the wanting was large enough to be. Frightening, she went home and she called Elise and she asked if she could come over. Of course, Elise said immediately. Without qualification doubt, she drove to Elise's apartment, the apartment that had a spare key in her possession. The apartment whose morning light she navigated from memory. Whose coffee equipment she knew as well as her own, and she sat on the couch and she looked at the record player and the sea glass on the windowsill and the drafting table in the corner and she said, I want to live with you here. I want this to be where I live. I want my books on these shelves and my things in this space and to wake up here in the morning. I know it might be fast by some measurements, but it doesn't feel fast. It feels like the next thing that's true. Elise was standing in the kitchen doorway, very still. I've been trying to figure out how to say that for 2 months, Elise said. I didn't want to push. I didn't know how to say it without seeming like I was assuming more than we'd agreed. We could have been saying it to each other for 2 months, Maya said. We could have been, Elise said. She crossed the room and sat beside her on the couch and took Maya's hands in both of hers. I want you here. I want this to be yours. I've wanted it probably since you fell asleep while I was reading to you, and I realized that was the best feeling I'd had in years. That you were comfortable enough with me to fall asleep. That this space was a place you could rest in. You should have said something, Maya said. So should you, Elise said. We're going to work on this, Maya said. The not saying things. Yes, we are, Elise agreed. Starting now. They sat on the couch that was going to become theirs, and held hands, and outside the August evening was warm, and the city was going golden, and they had everything still to do the practical arrangements, the boxes, the merging of two lives into one space, and none of it felt daunting. We should call Dana, Elise said. She's going to be insufferably pleased with herself. Maya said. She earned it, Elise said. Maya called her. Dana's response was immediate, audible, and entirely vindicated. They merged apartments over the course of a month in September, and the process was everything at once, logistically complex and joyful, occasionally frustrating and deeply satisfying. The particular work of two people who are making something new out of two separate things and taking the work seriously. They approached it the way they approached most things, with a combination of Elise's precision and Maya's enthusiasm, and when those two forces run into productive friction, with honest conversation and a willingness to find the third option that neither of them had thought of initially. There was a shared spreadsheet, which Elise made and Maya added to with the casual authority of someone moving into a space rather than visiting it. There were decisions about the bookshelves, whose system, how to merge, that took longer than any external observer would have found reasonable, and were. Both of them understood not really about the books. I need the books to be findable, Elise said. Quickly. When I'm in a certain frame of mind and I need a specific reference, I can't spend time looking. My system is also findable, Maya said. Just by different logic. Recent use proximity with content area clusters. It works. Elise looked at Maya's boxes. She considered. Show me the content areas, she said. Maya showed her. Elise listened with real attention. They arrived at a merged system that preserved both logics in different sections of the shelves and that both of them could navigate. The process took an evening and produced a solution that was better than either original. Which was, Maya thought, a good sign. Maya's ceramic whale went from her windowsill to the shared windowsill, where it joined Elise's sea glass and her river stones. The pendant had been at Maya's collarbone every day. It was now at home in an apartment, where both of its reference points lived. Elise made space in the wardrobe with a thoroughness that moved Maya when she saw it. Not a polite minimum, a genuine reorganization, a making of room. You didn't have to restructure everything, Maya said. You live here now, Elise said. It should work for two people. The apartment became theirs. Not through any single moment, but through accumulation, the second coffee mug in its habitual place. Maya's prints added to the walls and the spaces Elise had quietly identified as available. The Sunday morning routine that established itself without being established. The smell of the space that was, within 2 weeks. The smell of both of them. They had dinner parties that year, small ones. An evolving group of their combined people who were becoming a shared world. These evenings had the quality of something being built, not just socializing, but the active construction of a life that belonged to both of them, that had its own texture, its own recurring faces. At one of those dinners late in October, Dana caught Maya watching Elise across the room, Elise in conversation with someone from her firm, making a point with the precise economical gestures she used when she was engaged. Her face doing the thing it did when she was fully in an idea, and Dana said nothing. She just put her hand on Maya's arm briefly and squeezed. That was enough. At another. Elise found Maya across the room at a moment when Maya hadn't realized she was being found. And the expression on Elise's face when she did, just for a second, before she turned back to her conversation, was the kind of expression that is not intended for an audience. Pure and private, and saying exactly what it said. They were building something. They were already in it. And the building and the being in it were. It turned out the same thing. Elise had the ring for. 6 weeks before she used it, she'd had it made by a jeweler she trusted, someone who had done a piece for Carolyn years ago and who worked with a quality of care that Elise respected as a fellow person who took craft seriously. She described what she wanted with the same precision she brought to design briefs, not traditional, not ostentatious, something specific to Maya. Something that would make sense to anyone who knew them. The result was a ring that looked like a simple twist of gold from a distance, and that, when you looked at it closely, was actually two lines that wove together and supported each other without being inseparable, because separation was still possible. But the choice of being woven was what gave the structure its strength. The jeweler had understood immediately what she was describing. She'd had it in the inside pocket of her good coat since a Sunday in early October. She'd found the right moment approximately a dozen times and then found a reason it wasn't the right moment. Which was she understood this. About herself fear performing as discernment. The anniversary of the Dare phone call arrived on a Friday. Dana marked it with a dinner party, the same group in the same formation. A deliberate and affectionate callback that they'd all attended in the spirit in which it was offered. With pleasure and appreciation and a recognition that some dares should be celebrated, Maya had told the full dare story twice, once to Elise's family. Once at a party they'd attended in the spring, and it had the shape by now of a family mythology, a creation story. One of those tales that carries more meaning each time it's told because it accumulates the weight of everything that followed. After the dinner they walked home through the October night. 1 year since the call. The same streets, the same city. Different entirely. At the entrance to their building. The word had fully settled. Elise stopped walking. Maya felt the stop and stopped too. She turned. Elise's expression was the one from the first dinner. The one with the flowers, careful and open and uncertain and wanting. The expression she wore when she was doing something that fully opened her. "I want to ask you something," Elise said. "Okay," Maya said. Elise took a breath. "I want to spend my life with you. Not because the anniversary makes it a meaningful occasion, though it is, and not because I've had this ring in my pocket for 6 weeks, and I've been finding reasons it wasn't the right time." She paused. The right time doesn't exist independently of the choosing. I've been waiting for the right moment, and the right moment is any moment I'm standing here with you, and I know what I want. She reached into her coat pocket. "I know what I want," she said. "I want you." All of it, the arguments about bookshelves and the midnight conversations and the Thursday evenings and the Sunday mornings and the next 20 years of building things together. I want your laugh in this apartment and your wail on the windowsill and your coat beside mine and your name beside mine. I love you in a way that I don't have the right vocabulary for, but I have this. She opened the ring box. "Will you marry me?" The October street was quiet. The street lamp made its circle. The ring caught the light and held it. Maya looked at the ring. She looked at Elise's face in the lamplight, open and vulnerable and entirely present. The most actual version of this person she'd been finding all year. The person who was underneath all the precision and control and the habit of careful. The person who had wanted to call a dozen times and never did, and then finally sent a text at 1 a.m. that said dinner. "Not lunch?" "Yes," Maya said. "Yes." "Yes, obviously yes." Completely and entirely yes. Yes, with the full weight of 2 years and almost in all of the choosing. "Why did you have the ring for 6 weeks?" Elise laughed. "The real one, the best one. The one that started quiet and built." She put the ring on Maya's hand, and Maya looked at it on her hand and looked at Elise and kissed her on the October sidewalk in the circle of lamplight. In front of their building, in the city they both loved. In the life they built together out of a dare and a phone call in 2 years of almost and 1 year of yes. Maya texted Dana from Elise's shoulder. Still holding the ring hand up to see it in the light. Dana's response came in 12 seconds. It was a single word followed by a number of exclamation marks that Maya later told people she lost count of. The word was. Finally, they got married the following September, 14 months after the ring on the doorstep of their building. 2 years and 2 months after a dare that changed the direction of 2 lives that had already been moving toward each other for longer than either of them had fully acknowledged. The ceremony was in a restored historic building with high windows that let in September light, and walls that held a century of other occasions and gave this one the company of that history. 40 people, the people they loved and the people who loved them. In a room decorated with flowers Maya had obsessed over for 3 weekends, and that were exactly right dahlias and late-season roses. The colors of October a month early. As if the season were arriving to honor the occasion. The officiant was a friend of Elise's from graduate school who had since become ordained for exactly this kind of purpose. The rings were designed by the same jeweler who'd made the engagement ring, woven line bands that matched and were specific. The vows were their own. Written separately over 2 weeks, shared for the first time at the altar. Elise went first. She spoke slowly with the care she gave to things that mattered most. And what she said was about visibility, about what it meant to be seen completely, without the usual omissions. And to find that the person seeing you was not frightened by what they found, but rather drawn further in. She said, "You are the person in whose company the most actual version of me is possible. I want to spend my life being that person and giving you the same." Maya had promised herself she wouldn't cry. She cried before Elise finished the first sentence. She went second. She told the dare story in compressed form, the wine and the Friday night and Dana's hand and the phone and the laugh that stopped in the hall. Room that already knew the story laughed with the particular pleasure of a familiar thing told well. And then she said, 2 years ago, I called you on a dare and my laughter stopped when I heard your voice and I understood something about myself that I've been managing not to understand. I've been understanding things about myself ever since because of you. Because you are the kind of person who makes the actual version of me feel like enough. More than enough. Like the thing that was worth waiting for. Elise had, quietly and with perfect timing. A handkerchief ready. Dana, maid of honor on Maya's side, cried loudly and with the specific volume of someone who had earned the right. Carolyn, on Elise's side, maintained composure through the vows on sheer willpower and then abandoned the first 30 seconds of the reception. Priya, who delivered the reading, was perfect and devastated immediately afterward. James looked at his program throughout most of the ceremony in the way that people who feel things deeply sometimes look at objects when they were pronounced married. Maya kissed Elise in the September light with the full knowledge of everything it meant. The room made the sound that rooms make when they are full of people who love the people at the center of it. 40 people who would each tell this story differently. Who would each emphasize different moments. Who would carry different pieces of it. At the reception, someone found the original dare text chain on Dana's phone. She had saved the entire thing. Naturally, and it went around the room and became the evening's mythology. The dare, the call. The 5 minutes that became 5 hours. 2 years of almost, and then 1 year of yes, and then a life together. You should have called sooner, someone said to Maya. Probably, Maya said. But I needed the dare. I needed the push. I needed Dana to point at a name on a phone at 11 on a Friday night and make it unavoidable. The right push at the right time, Elise said. From beside her. And you picking up, Maya said. I always picked up for you, Elise said. I would have picked up at any point in the 2 years. I was waiting for you to call. The room around them was warm with their people and the evening was going beautifully. And they would stay until the last. Song and dance to 2 of them and leave with the knowledge of everything still ahead. Maya wore the pendant at her collarbone, the floor plan of the conference center where they'd met. The building that was, in a sense, the first room of the rest of their lives. She would wear it every day for the rest of her life. The ceramic whale was on the windowsill at home, in the apartment that was entirely and fully theirs. Catching the morning light and glowing, on Maya's phone in the contacts, the name she had changed twice from Dr. Elise Hartwell to Elise Home, had changed one final time. My wife, that was what the phone call made. That was what the dare made. And the voice on the line and the flowers. And the dinner that was not lunch. And the hand turned over and the kiss on the sidewalk. And the ring in the October lamplight. And 14 months later, a September afternoon with 40 people who loved them, a life, a home. A love that was built from 2 people who had been careful for too long and had finally stopped being careful in favor of being honest. And had found that honesty in the right company. Was not the risk they'd feared. It was the safest place they'd ever been.